Good morning, and thank you for joining us at the Tulsa Regional Chamber's 2020 Tulsa Small Business Summit and Awards. Before we begin, we'd like to recognize the generous sponsors who have made today's event possible. The Tulsa Small Business Summit and Awards is presented by Cox Media Group, Luxa Enterprises, and Vast.bank. Our gold sponsor is Tulsa Tech. Our small business benefactors are Exceptional Leaders Lab, Security Bank, Southwestern Payroll, and Web Branding. Our small business champions are Luxa Enterprises and Stride Bank. And our small business supporting sponsors are Integrated Business Technologies and TEDC Creative Capital. Please also take note of our corporate sponsors listed on your screen, as well as our exhibitors and partner sponsors listed on the event webpage. Joining us now is Weldon Bowman, founder and principal of W Design and chair of the Tulsa Small Business Connection.
Good morning and welcome to the Tulsa Regional Chamber's 2020 Tulsa Small Business Summit. My name is Weldon Bowman, and I'm an architect and the owner of W Design. As the current chair of the Tulsa Small Business Connection, I thank each of you for joining us virtually this morning. This year has been perhaps the most challenging year I have faced as a small business owner, and I'm sure many of you tuning in feel the same. When a disaster, or in this case, a global pandemic happens, small businesses are often the ones hit the hardest. Northeast Oklahoma's small business community wasn't spared by COVID, unfortunately, but I hope today can be part of the recovery process. While this year's summit looks different than previous years, I'm excited to say that we still have a full lineup of some of the best and brightest speakers and local experts. And the best part is we're bringing it to you right in your living room, office, or wherever you may be. I hope today's event will equip you with strategies and tools to move your business, organization, or team forward. Today is also the kickoff of National Small Business Week. So what better way to celebrate than tuning in to today's event? National Small Business Week is hosted by the U.S. Small Business Administration each year and is a week to honor small businesses across the nation for their achievements and dedications to their communities. So I'd say that the Tulsa Small Business Summit and Awards is a very fitting celebration. I'm excited to kick things off with our morning keynote presenter, TRACY Spears. TRACY is internationally recognized speaker, leadership coach, author, and co-founder of Exceptional Leaders Lab. She has co-authored the best-selling books, What Exceptional Leaders Know and The Exceptional Leaders Playbook. TRACY specializes in developing leaders, inspiring teamwork, and enhances inter-office communications, and has helped leaders and aspiring leaders all over the world improve their leadership skills, their communication, and their understanding of how people and organizations succeed. We're so grateful to have TRACY with us this morning to discuss building a high-performance culture. Joining us now, TRACY Spears.
So I woke up Friday, March the 13th, yes, Friday the 13th, and looked back on the last couple of weeks and only to realize that several of my speaking engagements had been canceled and that our business was about to take a big turn. I know a lot of you had that same experience. So on Friday the 13th, we made a decision, you know what, let's just take a week off. Let's go to a little place in Locust Grove, which we did. And in doing that, thought, you know, we'll just have a week, a little R&R and really not worry about the pandemic. Let's get out of town. So we drove out and ended up at our friend's house, Kevin and Rita's, and we, got there for dinner, had an amazing dinner, and, sat around a round table. Nobody had masks on. We were talking about the pandemic, but not really paying enough attention, obviously, as you'll hear in this story. And so at the end of dinner, we, apparently laughed on each other, crucial to the story, had a lot of really good wine, had some really fun conversations, really kind of a typical Friday night. And so we went home. So after that, about the next 2 or 3 days, everybody from that dinner party, there were 8 of us total, started to show symptoms of coronavirus. And for the most part, it was headaches, sore throats. It wasn't really anything too dramatic, except for 2 of us. So Rick and I were the two unfortunate ones in the group that ended up with the near-death experience. So 104 fever and too many days in bed. And I can just tell you that, that week and a half really changed everything, not only for me personally, but certainly for our business. So about 6 weeks later, when I finally came out of all of that, went back to work. And so got on the phone with my business partner, Wally, and I said, so what's happened since I've been gone? And he's like, well, kind of a lot. And I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, well, let's see, you had about 40 speaking cancellations. That's 80% of our income as a business is gone. And we've become a virtual leadership training program company. And I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds good. I mean, like, is there a market for that? And he's like, I'm not sure. And I said, do you think we can monetize it? I'm not sure, but there's a lot of people that need our help. And I was like, okay. So we rolled our sleeves up, we reinvented ourselves, like many of you have had to do. And so I can tell you that transition really set us up for a very different business model. So the pivot we had to make, not unlike what you've had to make, really put us in a completely different direction. And there's been some of that that's been really, really good, and some of that's been really, really hard. And let's talk a little bit about those. One of the things that happened from that pivot for us is we took on a lot of clients into consulting manner. So we do a lot of executive coaching, and we do a lot of leadership turnaround coaching jobs as well. So I wanted to give you our observations about what the companies that have done this really well over the last 6 months, what they've done. What are some of the things that they've done to create and maintain high-performing teams? Because I think that's really what we're all trying to do. We're not trying to go back to the way things were, but we have to figure out what are the new strategies that we have to use so that we can be successful in the new environment. So here they are. The first one is simply this: focus on outcomes. Right? Not on how-tos. When I think about the group of people, the two groups of people that probably have had the hardest time with this pandemic, it's going to be extroverts and micromanagers, right? Like extroverts, I mean, the idea of sitting at home or by yourself or in a room without being able to have any conversation, that's been really tough for our extroverted friends. And I actually have a friend that's an introvert, and because of all the downtime, I've had a little bit more time to reach out to some of my friends. And so I called her, it was her birthday, and she answered the phone and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm okay. I was calling to wish you a happy birthday. It's your birthday." And she's like, "Oh my gosh. I thought maybe you couldn't breathe. I thought maybe the COVID was back." And I said, "No, everything's good." And she's like, "Listen, I'm a texter, not a talker. So, next time, don't scare me like this. Just text me." I was like, "Happy birthday." So, I think for introverts, the idea of, sitting at their computer, maybe not having to interact, not having to listen to every single word that pops into the extrovert's head, at the work. I think they've actually done better. They've actually adapted probably a little bit better than everyone else. And so the micromanagers, here's the thing you have to know. Just because you're not seeing it, it's still happening. Right? I think it's really difficult if you are that person, that leader that has to have your hand on everything. And so this has been a really great lesson. A lot of our executive coaching clients, this has been the thing that we're talking about. How can you lead in an environment where you can't just walk in and say, "Hey, give me an update," right? How can you lead in an environment where people are not checking in as often? You don't have that one-to-one communication, or do you? We'll talk a little bit about how to do that as well. And I think the thing that those leaders have to get really, really good at is answering a couple of questions. And one is simply this: what does success look like, right? In the new environment, how will we know if we're successful? How do we measure that? Do we have visibility to the results? What are some of the things that we can do to move the ball forward and do it in a way that people feel like they're part of something really special? And so I think the focus on the outcomes piece of the business is probably a muscle that every leader needs to build. It's a muscle that if you don't get in the outcomes and you're in the how-to part of this, you're always going to compromise the output of high-performing teams. So that would be the first lesson. The second one would be, and it's just pretty simple, it's just tell the truth. Now, this sounds like it's an easy one, but let me just ask you this. How hard has it been over the last couple of months to answer some of the questions that you're being asked? When will we go back to work? Am I going to have a job? What's really going to happen to our industry? Do you think we'll ever recover? Right? So all those questions, I think you have to be the truth teller in your organization if you're the leader. And by the way, let's define leadership as influence. So it's anybody that's in a leadership role at all, right? It's not just the person signing the check. It's all of us. If you supervise people and they're asking you hard questions, listen, you have to have a little bit of discernment here, right? I'm not saying that you have to tell everything you know, but I think we have to be so much better at telling the truth in this environment. And I'll tell you why. It's simply this. If you don't provide the information, the story that people will make up when there's a vacuum, when they're not getting the information, is so much worse than what the truth is, right? If you just tell the truth, then people are left to their own device to figure out how they're going to manage that. But we have to at least be willing to be brave enough to say, you know what, I don't know if we're going to have layoffs. I'm not sure what the new environment's going to look like. I have no idea if the pivot is going to be successful, right? Some of those really tough conversations. To build a high-performing team, you just have to be transparent. Listen, the gateway to trust is truth and transparency. And there's no other way to get to trust. You can't have trust without it, and you can't build a high-performing team without trust. So those are a couple of things to consider. I think Brene Brown, I'm a big Brene Brown fan. If we've ever had a conversation together, you'll know this. And one of my favorite sayings of hers is that to be clear is kind, and to be unclear is unkind. I think that's true. I think the more clarity we can provide our teams, probably the better. Now, I will tell you a quick story. I did learn to tell the truth right out of college, my very first job. And I actually was selling cars at Jerry Ferguson's magnificent mile of cars down in Norman. And I was selling Pontiacs and Grand Trans Ams. And so in the first year that I was there, worked harder than I've ever worked in my life, but learned so much. And to tell the truth, I learned in one particular exchange, and it was simply this. A guy comes on the lot, he comes into the showroom floor, and there it is on the showroom floor, a Grand Trans Am, right? You remember that. So some of you are too young, but the Grand Trans Am, Smokey and the Bandit, think that's kind of what I'm thinking. And so he came on and he said, listen, I want to buy that car. And that car had been sitting there for way too long. Matter of fact, in our sales meeting that morning, Tom Johnson was saying, listen, we got to sell this car. We got to roll. We got to get it out of here. Let's make a deal on this car. And so I, brought the guy into the booth and I said, all right, listen, let's agree on terms. And he said, no, listen, I'm going to buy the car. Price isn't the issue. I just need a guarantee. And I was like, okay. And he said, I need a guarantee on the T-tops. You can give me that and I'm going to buy this car. I was like, all right. So I said, I'll be right back. So I run back to the back and Tom Johnson's back there and I'm like, you're not going to believe it. I got a guy in here. He's going to buy the Grand Trans Am, but we got to give him a guarantee. Tom he goes, okay, what kind of guarantee is he looking at? I said, well, he wants a guarantee about the T-tops. He's like, okay, I can do that. That's reasonable. And so, I would go back out and I sit behind my desk and Mr. Johnson comes in, I introduce him and he said, I understand you're looking at that Grand Trans Am. He said, yeah. He said, I'm going to buy it, but I need a guarantee. And Tom said, all right, well, I'll give you a guarantee. He said, let me just tell you, that car doesn't come with the roof already cut out. Like that's an aftermarket thing, a T-top. And he said, so I'm going to give you a guarantee. And here's your guarantee. It's probably going to leak. It's probably going to rattle. But I'm also going to guarantee that you're going to love driving it. And the guy, he goes, yeah, I'll take the car. I was like, oh my gosh. I thought that what we were trying to do was convince him that we were going to give him a guarantee. And he said, no, listen, when you guarantee something that you know is not true, that will come back to haunt you. And I think that's true. I think the times that we try to placate people or tell them what they want to hear in a leadership role, those things always come back to bite us. So I'm not advocating that everyone has to know every single decision or everything going on behind the scenes, but I do think we can be better in leadership roles about letting people know what's really going on. And I think this time absolutely demands that from us. So here's the third thing. And it's a big one and it's a hard one. And you have to get the org chart right. When you think about what has happened over the last year now, and probably what's going to continue to happen, I'm guessing that there's probably not very many small businesses that haven't had some kind of a layoff, right? Some kind of a furlough, some kind of a RIF in some way. And so in some way, and this is going to sound heartless, but it's kind of a good opportunity. It's a good opportunity to get the right people in the organization. I think the book Good to Great probably said it best when what they were saying is you have to get the right people on the bus. I think that's true. And so in consulting world, we call it don't waste a crisis, right? If there's a merger, an acquisition, or if something's going on, it's an opportunity to review talent. It's an opportunity to look and see, do we need to do things differently? Do we have the right people in the right roles? Do we have the right people? A lot of times it's not necessarily getting rid of somebody, but it's putting them in an opportunity where they can succeed. And so I think that if we could be better at being objective about getting the org chart right, teams would automatically perform higher, right? And I don't want you to think that I don't have empathy. I do. But I have empathy for the people that are working with people that aren't competent in their roles, right? What are we saying to that group of people when we allow somebody to stay in an organization that maybe it's just not the right fit? Maybe they're creating issues. Here's what I know from a leadership perspective. We spend more time with toxic employees than we spend with our great employees. And so to do that in any other way is really just perpetuating a low-performing environment. So I will give you a quick example of this. I had a client, I'm just going to call him Doctor, since I'm here talking in Tulsa. And he had somebody in his organization, I'm going to call her Martha. And so he called me and said, listen, we need a little team building. And he was a friend of mine as well. And I said, gosh, sure, happy to do it. So I go over, I spend the lunch hour with him. We do a little bit of training. And then in the middle of that, where I can kind of start to see some of the dynamics happening. And so he walks me out at the end of the training. And so he said, okay, now listen, I need to hire you to fire Martha. And I was like, oh gosh, first of all, which one was Martha? And he's like, yeah, she was sitting on the end. I go, no, I don't know. I go, but listen, that doesn't even matter. That's not what I do. I'm not going to fire anybody for you. I'm going to coach you. I'm going to help you, and you're going to be able to help Martha. And he's like, no, I really just need. And I go, no, not going to happen. And he said, well, listen, I'll catch up with you in a couple of months. Good. 2 months go by. My phone rings. And he says, hey, listen, let's do the second session of that team building. I want you to come over. And I was like, happy to do it. So I go over. Now I know that Martha's an issue for him, so I'm paying attention. And so we go through the training session, and I can kind of see a little bit of the dynamics, but I like Martha. She seems like a lovely person. She's contributing. I don't even see and understand what's going on. So he walks me out to my car, and he goes, listen, today's the day. I need you to go in there and fire Martha. And I know you're going to say you don't do that, but I'm going to pay you double whatever you typically make. So I thought for a minute, and I thought, well, poor Martha. I'm a small business owner after all, so I'm clearly going to do it. But I'm going to continue the conversation and say, listen, what's going on? Why are you trying to get me, an outsider, to do what you should have already done? How long have you felt this way about Martha? He rolls his eyes around and he goes, well, ever since she's been here. I go, how long has she been here? 16 years. Oh my gosh, this is not Martha's fault. This is your fault. He goes, I know, but I still need you to go fire her. And so I'm going to say this about that situation. That was not Martha's fault. Leaders that don't have the courage to have the conversations they need to have, right? That's your part of the org chart not being right, to give her an opportunity to change her behavior, which, by the way, probably was changeable. Of course, I had to fire her that week, and I did, but he did pay me double. And was forever grateful after that. But I don't want Marthas walking around thinking they're going to get fired, because leaders don't have the courage to give them the training. So what we have to do is figure out who's a can't and who's a won't, right? If somebody is a can't, they can't do the job. Our job in leadership roles, it's to give them the training. It's to prop them up. It's to make sure that they have every opportunity to be successful. If we have somebody that's a won't, somebody that won't ever be able to do the job, no matter what, our job is simple in that. We have to figure out how to coach them up or coach them out. And that means sometimes getting rid of people. And I'm going to tell you, this is not the fun part of our job. But to get the org chart right, that means to move it around, put super successful people in absolutely the right roles. It's right-sizing the talent. And sometimes, unfortunately, it is making a change. But you can't duck that, right? That's a function of a high-performing team. We used to, have a joke about the difference between a club and a team. It's cuts, right? A club is everybody gets to play, but a team is there's going to be people that aren't going to make it. And so I'm not going to spend any more time on this, but I do want to make sure that you know that is a fundamental piece of a high-performing team. And unfortunately, I think that people don't embrace that, but there's a lot of upside on the other side of that. Number 4, This is a key that, and I'm going to give you the warning on both sides. It's embrace technology, all right? So that's the first part of it. Without abusing it is the second part of that. So we're watching people do amazing things with technology in this crisis, but we're also watching people really abuse it. So here's what I'm going to say. You should not be on a Zoom call 8 hours a day. There, I've said it. Show this to all your colleagues. You shouldn't be on a Zoom. You shouldn't be on a call for an hour if you're just talking to one person. Really? Do you have that? I mean, I was on a call yesterday, and at the end of it, I said, I think this could have been an email, right? I mean, how many calls are you on that should be an email? How many calls are you on that really are just wasting your time? And what I've seen happen over the last 6 months is people have taken more face-to-face meetings on Zoom because, if I don't see you, then nothing's happening. And that's not the case. If you think about how often you're on a Zoom or a Teams call, and how often you're sitting there on email all day long, here's the question to answer. When are you getting your work done? I don't know. And if you are somehow still getting it all done, then what are you doing? And what can you do differently? So that's the technology. And I am going to say this. I've been on so many Zoom calls and Teams calls where don't wear a tank top. Wear the right shirt. I don't care, pants optional. Look like you're going to the office. Be mindful. Turn your computer where the window's coming in and we can see your beautiful face. And I think, I was on a call yesterday and somebody had a super big monitor. And let me tell you how I knew. It was just two of us. So Zoom does the side by side. And the entire call, she stared over here. And I was on the other end going, try to get her attention. So on Zoom, just shorten the box and put the picture of the person you're talking to on top, and you're underneath the camera. Okay, I shouldn't go into that much detail, but these are things we need to know, right? There are better ways for us to do Zoom calls. And I was on a call last week, and it was a woman. She said, "Oh, I'm in my husband's office." I said, okay, because he had sports memorabilia, which I was super interested in, by the way. And he had this one really big picture. And at some point during our call, he walked in. And you know how I knew he walked in is because I saw everything he was doing in the picture. She was a total pro and never looked up at him, never acted like he was there. I'm not going to tell you, I just saw too much. So I'm just saying, so we need to be mindful of reflection. So that's the only other thing I'm going to say. And there's the last thing on technology. Listen, don't sweat the miscues, right? If you think about, I think some of the humanizing things that we've been able to experience, I love seeing your kids. I love seeing your pets. I love seeing the shirtless husband walking around. It has all happened. And I think it actually kind of makes it a little bit easier. I hope that it's created a little bit more connection in some cases. And I will tell you this, I've also learned a lot about people that can't roll with that. It's been interesting to watch people that get super flustered when something goes wrong in technology. So that's another great sign of a great leader. And by the way, back to the emails, Slack. Use Slack. Use something other than emailing all the time. Use the instant messaging. Those are things that can really create a lot of fatigue in an organization when you open your email and there's 180 emails. I don't know. That's really discouraging. So be mindful of how you use that technology. And here's the other thing to consider. The technology has made people more productive. Right? This environment, we've saved an hour in some cases, not having to commute. We've saved time, obviously not having to sit down and do all of the small talk. So there's been a lot of ways that we've been able to be more productive. So here's my challenge to you. 50% of the time that you're on a call, whatever that number is, try to reduce it by 50%. High-performing teams, that will give you time to go do things that can actually drive revenue, that can actually increase the value of the business. So those are just a couple of suggestions. Number 5, diversity. Now I want to talk for about 6 hours on this, so I'm sadly going to give you a couple of minutes, but it has to be on one of the keys to building a high-performing team. I'm going to even say this, you can't have a super high-performing team without it. And when we talk about diversity, here's what the idea I want you to connect to. Listen, in corporate America, I do a lot of diversity and inclusion training. And what typically happens is we bring a diverse group of people together, we put them on a team, And they don't have something that's fundamental to high-performing teams, and that's trust. We talked a little bit about that. Because they don't have that trusting environment, they don't get off to a fast start. They don't trust each other. There's some misses in communication. And all of a sudden, what ends up happening is the leader of that team starts to make changes, and they start to make them a little bit too soon. The difference between the diverse team and the homogeneous team, the team where everybody's alike, we know each other, we have connection, that homogeneous team gets off to a very fast start. They have trust immediately. But over time, the diverse team, by integrating different points of view, different experiences, different ways of doing and seeing things, that diverse team will outperform the homogeneous team every single time if an organization can actually give it enough time to see the results. And so I'm just going to cheer you on that if you're in some of those, oh my gosh, everybody, we can't connect, do some team building activities, do some things to create some trust, because in the end, when you have a team that actually represents your client base, your city, who you're trying to sell to, when you have people that have that representation, you're going to have a much straighter connection to your customer. And I just am going to say this. I don't think that you could be successful without diversity, because I think customers are demanding it, and I think employees are demanding it. I don't think employees, we're watching a lot of people say, you know what, I'm not going to stay in an organization where I don't have a voice. I'm not going to stay in an organization where I can't be heard. I'm not going to stay in an organization where I can't be authentically who I am. Listen, the George Floyd murder changed everything. Right? For a lot of people, they were like, no, it was a long time before that. But let's agree that that's been a shift that's happened in our culture. And when you look at that shift, thank goodness, it needed to happen. And this isn't a moment in time, right? This is a movement. This is something that's very different. And you need to be on the right side of that as an organization. And when I think about all of the organizations that we work with that have high-performing teams, they're getting this one really right. I actually watched the chamber very early on. I believe I was still in a little bit of a COVID phase. I watched Kuma Roberts get on and lead the entire organization, and just let's have a conversation about it. And I've also watched organizations not willing to do that. And I'm going to say this. I think it's required. I think we have to be a little bit more connected to the experience of all of the people that are in our organizations. And fundamentally, to do this any other way probably isn't going to get you the outcome that you want in your business anyway. So I can tell you it's the right thing for sure. It's the profitable thing for sure. But I'm going to tell you this, I don't think you're going to be able to be successful if you don't embrace this. And we've been involved with a lot of organizations creating just conversations around what are some of the experiences people have. That call that Kuma led, the question was simply this: when have you experienced racial inequity and racial inequality? What are some of the things that have happened? And I'm going to tell you what I saw that day. I saw a bunch of people on a call. It was a Teams call or a Zoom call, because it must have been Zoom, because there were a bunch of us, 60 some odd people. And you saw every single word that was said. Everybody felt every word. And in that environment, let me just tell you something, that changes a team. That changed that organization. I've watched it change other organizations. And I think it's changed them for the better. I think it makes us all a little bit more connected. And when you think about high-performing teams and creating, more connection, there's no way that doesn't translate to that team being more productive. So I really want to talk more about this. So I'm not. I hope, and I believe Kuma has already been in to give you some inclusive language. There's a lot, but I think we've got to get this one right. All right, so number 6, and this is the last one, and I wasn't sure what to call it, so I'm just going to call it lead. That's going to be it. And it's simply that we have to be mindful of the culture of our organization. In a leadership role, here's my best definition of culture. It's an emotional response to leadership. That's it. It's how people feel about an organization. You can try to do a culture audit. You can try to measure what is culture, but the truth is it's a bunch of people walking around feeling either really passionately about their job and the products they deal and about leadership, or it's a group of people that have low morale, right? What can you do to improve the culture in your organization? You can do all the things we've just talked about, from getting the right people on the bus, creating a more inclusive environment. All those things are part of that. I'll give you a couple of other things we've seen in the last 6 months from our clients. We're watching organizations do non-business business calls. Said differently, 30 minutes on the calendar. You can't talk about projects. You can't talk about anything that's going on. You can just talk about whatever's on your mind. Most of those calls are, man, I'm really struggling. Gosh, I saw this on the news. It's just an opportunity for people to have a different kind of conversation. We've seen some super fun clients have the cutest pet contest. That was a client recently that everybody had to bring their pet. By the way, your pets are always on the call anyway, virtually, so that was kind of fun. A costume contest, October is coming up, Halloween's coming up. Certainly that would be something that you could do. Just, doing something a little bit out of the ordinary. We had a client that had a map on Zoom, and somebody took a highlighter, and people were just, where were you born? And they were circling that, and they created kind of a map of where everyone was born. Also seen them do where's the place that you have traveled that's, the farthest away from Tulsa, and that was kind of a fun call. So I think we just have to be more mindful that, listen, the days of don't take it personally, it's not personal, those days are over. Everything is personal, right? We're humans. So of course, everything's going to be personal. Creating a personal connection is going to help you lead a high-performing team, no doubt about it. I think the other thing that we're seeing that a lot of organizations are doing and doing really, really well is also taking the opportunity to talk more about inclusion. And, we've been involved in, the documentary 13, getting on with an executive leadership team and talking about what is systemic racism, talking about the book reviews, White Fragility. And so you want to talk about race. There's so many opportunities. We've also seen clients that say, let's talk about, a Brene Brown book, or let's, a novel that everybody might be interested in. So I think there's a lot of ways for you to be more mindful of the culture, the emotional experience of your team, and I'm cheering you on to consider that. And I'm going to end by the 6 things very quickly. Focus on the outcomes, tell the truth, embrace technology, get the org chart right, diversity is the main ingredient, right, and then lead. But I'm going to end with this, and it's simply somebody that I look up to that has done a really great job of leading in a crisis. A lot of you have heard me talk about my college softball coach, and her name was Marita Hines, and she was probably the best that I've ever seen, and she obviously made a big impression on me as a young person. And so I'll tell you a couple of quick stories. One of them, when something would go wrong, as it often did, she was fiery, but she was pretty cool under pressure. She would make a pivot faster than probably any other coach that I can remember having. I remember one time we were supposed to work out in the weight room, and it was closed for whatever reason, and then it was just only the football players could go in. And she's like, okay, well, no big deal. And we had to go at 7 a.m. She said, well, let's just start playing water polo in the mornings. And so our workout went from weight room to water polo. And I want to tell you this, it was traumatic for me because I was, scared of the water. And if you know my story, I grew up in a trailer park over at the Mingo Valley, the Admiral, where Admiral and Mingo connect, the traffic circle. And so, every day in the summer, you could find me down by the swimming pool. But what you don't know is that because I was so afraid of the water, I would have the nose plugs on, the big pink band that went around. And not only would I be wearing them, but I would have them on all summer, just in case somebody pushed me in the pool. So this wasn't new. This wasn't fun for me. Everybody else was excited that, we don't have to lift weights. We're going to be in the pool. So I spent that entire semester hanging onto the side of the swimming pool, waiting for the coach to blow the whistle, because you had to go, and then I would tread water and go back. But I'm going to tell you, I now think back on that a lot of people think, oh wow, that was a super fun time for us, that pivot. And this is going to happen in your organization. You're going to do things that you probably would never do otherwise, that are going to be memorable. I watched her in the middle of a rain tournament one time bring a helicopter in and put the helicopter right over the field just to dry the water off. So I don't know, we have to think differently. I think that, in a leadership role right now, doing things in a little bit different way is being required of us. And having a little bit of fun, there's nothing wrong with that, right? For us to be willing to look at how we approach our positions, how we approach the culture, I think all those things, we're being asked to do all of those. And so listen, I don't know where your business is right now, but here's what I know. We're not going back to the way it used to be. That's not an option. We have to take everything that we've learned in the last several months and move those things forward and do it differently. Let's reinvent ourselves. Let's do things in a way that perhaps we probably should have done before, but we were on autopilot. That's been the great outcome of what's happened over the last 6 to 8 months. In my business, I haven't been on a plane since February. Since February, I mean, like for 20 years, I can't remember not being on a plane almost every week. That's what I did for a living. I'm loving being home every single night. I'm loving being able to have clients where I have more of a connection instead of, getting up and giving a 1-hour speech. So I know in our business, yeah, it's been tough. We lost 80% of our income, but the shift and the pivot, I can look ahead a year from now and see that, we're going to be in a really great place. And I hope the same for your business. Thank you.
A special thanks to Tracy Spears for those valuable strategies all of us can utilize within our teams and organizations. As I mentioned, this year's Small Business Summit looks a little different than what you may be used to. So I want to quickly run through the rest of our agenda and some additional instructions. We have 2 sets of breakout sessions today, the first starting at 9:30 and the second starting at 10:30. You can see the complete list of breakout session options to choose from and the links to access each session at the bottom of this webpage. After the breakout sessions, you'll come back to tulsachamber.com/Small Business Summit to hear another great keynote from internationally acclaimed author and consultant, Dr. Gustavo Grodnicki. Last, but certainly not least, immediately following Dr. Gustavo's keynote, our award ceremony will begin, where we'll highlight some of the Northeast Oklahoma's most remarkable small business owners and organizations. We'll now head to a break to give you a few moments to figure out which breakout session you'd like to tune into first. Thank you again for being part of this very special Small Business Summit.